All right, so we're going to do new site 4. I'm going to fork that over. Let's have that give a run. So new site 4 is going to be adding a section page and also adding some search functionality. So those are 2 objectives here. Let's clone that down and get that started. So I'm going to do git clone new site 4. All right, so as always, if you have coded up new site 3, want to use your own changes, would recommend copying over the relevant files. If not, I think we have starter code in here for you to use. So your choice, but definitely get to use your own stuff if you have it. All right, so let's fire this up. So we're going to do cd into the news app. Oops, cd news app. And we want to npm install. So again, npm install is going to go through our package.json. We have a bunch of libraries that we are using. I'm not even sure what half of these are for. I assume it's for the server that we've mocked up there. But yeah, we're going to install all this. So that'll take a good number of seconds or minutes even. But while that's doing its thing, let's continue reading the README. So let's see. Jump over there. All right, so the README initial setup, as noted, you can copy over your source or just use your own files. We're going to be adding a section page. So we've I think established the section API call to our server where we get the data, but we've not created a specific page to actually show the section items we want. So we're just going to be creating a section page following the steps listed here. So once our app is ready, it should be any minute now, we can get this going. So
Ankur, right now, what's happening is you're installing all those node modules. Is that what's happening right now?
Yep. Yeah. So the node modules folder is not going to be part of any project we want, right? So anyone that downloads this project, whether it be you, some other student or myself, this package.json specifies exactly the versions we're using. Now, this is usually important. One thing we ran into earlier this week was we had a version change, right? React Router DOM was not using version 6. So hypothetically, if this was created like a year ago, even like 2 months ago, because version 6 wasn't released then, if this, we would specify this to be version 5.8, whatever the version was. I don't know what the previous version was. Given that, if you download this project and ran npm install, it would use the proper version of React Router DOM, and everything should work fine because the code should be in a pristine state and work with the libraries that were given to it. What we did on Monday was we created a new app from scratch, and we used the latest React Router DOM. So we were using version 6, but obviously our coding examples and myself included were not ready for that change. So that's the whole reason of why we have package.json to specify exactly what versions this application works with.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks you for your question. All right, so we did npm install. We should be able to do npm start now, and if everything is good and ready, server should load up.
A quick question.
Yep, go for it.
Before we get into 4, like just overall for new site 3, the main idea of new site 3 was just to not use the data.json file and use the information from the API that our server was like giving us, right? That was the main idea of new site 3?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It was replacing the dummy data to get it from a server now. So again, the server is like a dummy server, but it's better simulates what you'd be doing with a real application, which is making a request to our server. The server will give you back data, and then use that data to display it in your application.
Okay, like I was a little confused as to like when I knew I was done with it. I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah, it kind of left you hanging because we implemented the section API call, but we didn't actually use the section data. So I guess that was kind of awkward stopping point for new site 3. But that is what we're going to continue here today. So this is new site 3. We should be getting this data from our server. So this is not from our dummy data or hard-coded data from our project. What else did we do? We had the ability to click on an article and get that article. So that should still be in place. Again, this article is coming from the server. Obviously, there's no way to really know that because it looks the same as if we're going from our dummy data. Let's take a look at what new site 3 implemented here. So if I go to my app, where let's go to our homepage that has, it's in our pages homepage. So our homepage is now using a use effect. Now, again, we went over use effect this morning. We obviously introduced it earlier than today, but let's kind of just backtrack and make sure we understand what exactly this use effect is doing. So in our homepage, we have one use effect. That use effect, notice, has an empty dependency array. What this means is dependency, I can't spell. All right. Array means that this will only trigger once on initial. All right, just adding some comments so we know what it's doing. So again, empty array means this part will only be fired once when this component initially is rendered the first time. Any future updates, this is not gonna, this logic is not gonna be done. So what's happening is when this homepage is loaded, we are calling into our articles API and calling fetch articles. If you notice a couple things here, we are using the await keyword. Important thing to remember, you can only use the await keyword inside of the asynchronous function. So this function has an async keyword, which means we are allowed to use await. If you try to use await outside of an async function, you will get an error telling you exactly what I just told you, that you cannot use await outside of an async function. So for use effect, this is something we didn't mention earlier, but use effect cannot be made asynchronous. So one thing you might think is like, hey, why do you create a function inside a use effect and then call that function right after it? Like, why create it in the first place? Why not just make use effect asynchronous and then do all this logic kind of like this? That's a great question to ask. Definitely a question worth asking. Like, why don't we just make use effect this function async and do this logic? Well, the answer is use effect cannot be async. Use effect is a React function. It is designed to be synchronous. So for that reason, you cannot make it async. That's going to break some functionality. Bad things will happen. So we can't simply just create an anonymous function that we pass into use effect. We need to pass in a synchronous function to use effect. But within that, we can call an asynchronous function, and then things will work right. So again, use effect is synchronous, but this get articles call is asynchronous, meaning set articles is not going to be called immediately, right? This fetch takes some time. It's going to be asynchronous. Whenever it returns, we're going to get some data back, and that data will be set into our state value. Any questions on this use effect right here? Okay, so once we grab the articles, we simply pass articles down to article list, and that's what's rendering all the articles that we see on the homepage, which I don't have a link for. So all these articles are part of the article list. They're coming from the server. So if you remember, we also implemented our API on the application side. So we implemented fetch articles by ID. So that gets an individual article based on an ID that we pass it. But we also did this third method here, fetch articles by section, which we're not using right now. This should take in a section name, and then we're going to use this filter syntax for the URL to actually filter on the section. So if you guys look at the data that we're working with, you can go to the data by going to localhost 3001. That's where the server is running, /API/articles. That's where you're making a request to, but you can view this data in your browser. So if I go to that location, notice that this is the article data that we're actually getting back on our application side. Within each of these objects, this is represent an article. Notice that we have a section key value pair. So this section is what we're going to be filtering on when we want a specific item. So notice that we have business as a section, opinion, world. That's kind of modeled over here. We have opinion, world, national, and business. Currently, these links do nothing at all. I'm clicking on them. They're not really doing anything. If I bring up my property inspector, they do print out what I'm clicking on because that's something we implemented with, I think, new site 2 or 1, or I don't know which new site iteration. But again, the on-click handlers here simply just print out what you click on. Doesn't really take you anywhere or do anything of interest. But that is what we're going to change today with new site 4.
Hey, Ankur, I have a question.
Yep.
Can you go back to your API file
Absolutely.
Okay, do you see on line 10, right, where you have the filter? Why couldn't you use just like base URL, and then similar to line 4 where you have article ID? Why couldn't you just put section there instead of all the filtering code?
Great question. So this is our limit. We're limited by what the server is providing. So the server provides an access point or a get request or a get response to this request. So if I go to actually base URL, which is localhost 3001 API articles /ID, that location exists for the server. So if I go to let's say go to article 3, this is something that the server knows, like we're making a request to this particular URL and it gives us back data. That server has not coded up anything for section. So if I do articles/section, the server doesn't know what this location is. It's going to be a 404 error, meaning the server doesn't know where we're trying to go to because the server has not implemented it. If the server had, then yes, we can make a request by the section. So if I go here, notice we get 404, unknown article ID section. So even if we went to API/section, then these are just URLs that the server does not know. So the server's like, you're trying to make a request. I don't know what you're trying to access. So it gives us back a 404 error.
Okay, so basically, if you can you go back to the browser really quickly for the address bar, yeah, for the address bar where you added like for instance article 3, right? That 3 is not that ID 3 in the
it is an ID. So that's the ID.
You understand article. Like yeah, so is it the ID like on after image, or it says ID, the ID number, is that what it is for? Yep. Or are those, oh, okay.
Yep.
It's not just the index of the article, it's the actual calling that ID number?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I guess I would need to dive into the server, but it happens like the ID and the index match up, except they're off by 1. So yeah, the 0 index has an ID of 1. So if we go to that, we should see Nostrum Ots. I can't pronounce any of these. If we go there, yep, we get Nostrum. Yeah, so it's using that ID, and then that's how it's serving back the data. Yep, so
awesome.
We're limited by what the server has provided us. So that's why we need to use this filter, because that's something that the server will understand. But yeah, good question there. So now that we already implemented this part of new site 3, let's actually get to using it. So following the steps on our curriculum page, first we want to create a section page component inside of source pages. Let's go ahead and do that. So go to pages. I'm going to create section page.js. This is going to be a functional component. So I'm going to quickly create that section page. All right, so section page is going to be pretty similar to our home page. Let's look at what our home page is doing. So our home page is getting a bunch of articles via the fetch articles. It's storing that as a state value. So we get articles and store as a state. And then it's rendering it via an article list component. Now, our section page is essentially going to do the same thing. The only key difference is going to be, instead of fetching all articles, we're going to kind of filter it by a section. So I'm sure there's some reuse we could do here, but I'm just going to kind of re-implement what we have there. So copy what I have in homepage. So we have a state value, that's going to be the same. I'm just going to copy everything and recode it. So saving some time here. Hopefully you guys are fine with that. All right, so I copied my homepage logic, put it into my section page, but we do need to modify it. So the first thing we want to modify is our getting of articles. So we don't want to get every article here. Instead, we want to call fetch articles by section, was it? Great, what it was called, but let's import it. So import article API from that. And then what was it called? Fetch articles by section, that is exported, so it should be able to find it. Let's copy it so I don't mistype it. All right, section page, fetch articles by section. Now, this method, if we look back at our API, needs to take in a section value versus fetch articles can take in nothing and it'll be fine. It'll just get you everything. So section, we need to specify that. So how do we actually get the section value here? That would be a question we need to answer, but this needs to take in some section name or whatever we call it. So we'll get back to this. So let's table that. But let's add a comment. We need to pass a section value. All right, but that API should, if we pass it a section value, should give us the data as in the articles just for that section. And then we should be able to set it. Once we set that value, or we're going to reuse that article list component to just show all the articles that we get back from that call. All right, so our render is going to remain the same. Our state value is the same as with our homepage. The only difference is our use effects is now going to call fetch articles by section, but we have the additional item of how do we get the section value. So keep that in our mind. And let's kind of proceed on here. We'll kind of figure that out. So here it says create a new route with sections and section name in our app.js, which points to section page. Okay, so we're going to be adding on to our browser router that we were using in app.js. So here's our browser router. Notice we have two existing routes that we implemented before. One was to our homepage. The second was to a specific article based on an article ID. So that was a variable that we're using there. So we're going to create a new route, exact path. I think someone mentioned, I think Tom mentioned exact might not be in use anymore for version 6, but I don't think it hurts. So I'm going to keep it for now. Section, is it plural? What do they want? Sections, yep. Section with an S slash, and now we specify a variable within our URL, as in kind of like a wildcard that can be captured with a colon, and then we'll do section name, I guess. And then the element is going to be our section page. Section page. So that's what will be rendered when they go to that route. All right, obviously we need to import it because we just created a new component. So section page from pages section page. All right, so setting up a new route, pretty simple. Just got to specify where the user will go to and what we're going to deliver back to them. Again, very similar to Django routes where we set up URLs and then we service them with views to give them back some HTML template back to them. All right, so section page is what we're going to return. But now, if we kind of think about it, we have access to a section name. Now, if we forgot, totally reasonable, we can look at our article page and kind of see how are we actually getting the article ID from the article route. So if I go to article page, let's take a look at what's going on here. So here we are getting article ID from something called params. And it looks like params is something that we're getting from use params. Now this is new stuff to version 6 of the router. You need to use this use params function, which comes from React Router DOM. That will give you access to everything. Where is it? So the items in your URL that are being matched, those params are what the use params are returning. So that use params is going to be an object, and that object is going to contain every parameter you have. In this case, we only have one, but you could have multiple, like donut value. If I have multiple values, my param should have every value that is being captured. So if I go back to my section page, let's kind of implement what we just saw in our article page. So
Ankur, may I ask you a question real quick? I'm sorry, I might have missed what you just said about having multiple parameters. Did you say it would just be a / and then the colon and then that other parameter name again? Is that what it was going to be?
Yeah. Again, very similar to Django. Yeah, we could have nested, I guess, routes sort of where we have multiple parameters we're specifying. So, maybe again, we're not going to do this, but we could have section name and then article and then maybe article ID. I mean, it wouldn't make sense since we have an article route, but we could have an article ID here so that we could capture both the section name and an article ID and use that within some other component. If we want like a section article page or something.
Thank you.
Yep. In this case, we're not going to get that nested.
Ankur, sorry to interrupt. I think on line 10 here on app.js, we should have a .js at the end of section page.
Yeah, so that's a good catch there. Yeah, we do have JSs here. It is actually optional. I know, so it is good to be consistent. So I think we definitely should, but just know that you can import without the .js and it'll be fine. But that is a fair catch.
Good to know.
Yeah, it seems like VS Code, like it's autofill. I relied on the autofill there, and it doesn't put the JS by default. But it looks like we added those. So yeah, I prefer consistency. So I'm glad you pointed that out. But yeah, just a good knowledge point there is that the .js is optional for the components there. But okay, so let's go back to our section page, and we need to import something. So that import is going to be that use params function that we wanted to use from React Router. One thing to mention here, you can import from React Router. Normally, we've been doing it from React Router DOM. React Router DOM has additional data or libraries that React Router does not have. So you can always be safe importing from React Router DOM. It's a larger, not subset, superset, I guess, of React Router. So either way, like the autofill, just put React Router because use params is in the React Router, I guess, namespace rather than React Router DOM. But either way, use params is where we want to import. Now we can get a params object. So let's do const params equals use params. All right, so again, this is functionality coming from the React Router that we kind of installed in 2 versions ago. So use params is a function that gives us a params. Once we have that, we should be able to do params.section name. Again, keep in mind that this value is being captured by this URL, or this piece of the URL. So that name has to match. I call it section name here. So I have to call it section name right here. Okay, let's actually just add some console log to make sure we are getting what we expect. So we'll do a console.log of params.section name. So I should put that above here.
Ankur, if we had multiple parameters, then could we deconstruct use params?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can. I mean, let's do that since why not? So yeah, we could do section name. And deconstructing is just a JavaScript construct. It is not special to React or anything like that. So yeah, deconstructing might be your preferred syntax, which is totally cool. So there we deconstructed use params, and now we should be able to get section name, but we don't have params anymore. Okay, so hopefully we can console log the correct value when we navigate to the section page. Let's go back to the README, make sure we get all the steps. So we created a component section page. We created a new route. We obtained the section name from using use params. That's checked off. Within section page, utilize the fetch articles by section. Looks like we kind of get ahead of ourselves there, but we created that already. We should give back a state value. So we created the state value again. We did some copy and pasting. We have a state value tracking our articles. That's initially an empty array. Our call to fetch articles by section should give us an array of articles back. And then assuming that is non-null, we want to set that into our state value. So that state value would trigger a re-render, and articles list should populate all the articles that we have. Okay, so I think we have accomplished, or we followed all 5 steps here. I think that's all we need to do. Now it says attempt to navigate to this location. So this is on our application side. So this is a URL that or a path that we've created. So I'm just going to copy and paste right here. So we're going to HTTP localhost 3000, which is our application, not our server, /sections/world, right? So again, if you remember our route, this world part is going to be captured by the section name ideally. So I'm going to go to this. All right, so state not defined. That is particularly because I copy and pasted, but didn't copy and paste the imports. So use states, definitely want to use that. And also have a use effects. Use effects from React. Always some trouble copy and pasting. Gotta get those imports there too. All right, so it looks like my terminal is happy now. I got compiled successfully. Let's try going back to that page, refresh it. Article list, yep, more imports. Let me just go back to my home page and copy all its imports. All right, so yeah, we need those 2 items as well. So, all right, let's make sure we have all of our imports here. Article list, where we imported Article API. Hopefully that should be it for my imports. Let's try it one more time. All right, there we go. So notice we're at localhost 3000 sections/world, and we have a bunch of articles. Now the question is, are these the articles that we want? Well, we can kind of spot check. Like if we look for, these should be unique titles. So if I look for this title, I'm going to copy and paste it. And I'm going to go back to my server here, where we were looking at all the articles. And let's actually make sure that this is actually a world section. So if I look for Always copied. All right, so this is the article that I saw, and it looks like that is actually business. That's not good. World. There better not be multiple here. Okay, so that has section business. That is not good. Why not that? Let's try another one. So Delore. Oh, these aren't even going to the right article. So I think I know an issue here. Yeah, so when I click on the article, I'm not actually going to the right article. Notice this is article index 3, not actually that article. So that's something we might need to clean up here. Think why. So we have an ID here. We need to use that ID. Okay, so that makes sense to me. So I go to, it looks like we have an error in our code. So if I go to article list, where's article list? It's in our components, article list. So if you remember previously, when we were using the dummy data, we set the ID based on the index that we're using. But now we don't need to use index. Our article has an ID on it because our server has an ID field on it. Our previous data did not. So again, it's probably kind of hard to remember what data we had, but we do have an ID now. Previously, we did not have an ID in our dummy data. We actually have that data, we do. So news.json is what we're using before. This was our previous, data, but that did not have an ID field, so we had to kind of like simulate it. But now that we have an ID, we should not be using index +1. We should just be using article.id. I think that was unintentional, but hopefully you guys had that correctly coded in your new site 3. All right, so that should be using article ID. That's the article list component, which both the home page and section page are using. So let's make sure we didn't break any functionality there. Let's go back to the home page since that was working before. All right, this is our home page. Let's refresh. All right, let's click on an article, make sure we actually get taken to the article. So if I click on quiz sit Delore, all right, we are taken to quiz sit Delore. So it looks like that's correct. Let's do one more, just to have one more spot check. Let's do Laborvinium. All right, Laborvinium. Okay, so our homepage seems correct based on the change we made. Let's go back to our world section. So I'm gonna refresh. All right, so we have an article, Discernment at Nemo. Let me click on that. All right, so I'm taking the correct article. That is a positive sign. Let's double check what our server is giving us for that article. I want to find, yeah, there we go. So we found Discernment and at Nemo. Notice that the section for that is world. So we are going to the world. We're going to the sections of every article on this page should be of section world or have a section value of world. So we spot checked one. We could do one more just for fun. Let's do this one. So I'm going to copy that. And hopefully this has a world section also. If not, then we might need to go back to the drawing board here. Let me search for that. And there we go. We found this article. Notice the section there is world. We could do this for every other article that's listed, but I'm pretty confident that this is working correctly now. So all these articles on this page now, we're going to section/world. These are all articles that have section of world. All right, so it seems like our section page is working correctly. So high five to everyone there. But there's an issue here that might not be kind of apparent. Anyone happen to know what might be amiss? I mean, the curriculum page kind of mentions it, but I want to know if anyone maybe can spot an error with our code right now. All right, fair enough. So let's read more on the curriculum page. Okay, looks like we're gonna table that, but I can tell you what's wrong.
Is it the catch? Like you don't have an error handling?
That's an excellent point. I should have error handling. I think I've been between versions here. But yeah, I for sure should have a try catch. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That wasn't the issue I had in mind, but that was definitely to write safer code. We should be using try catch. So thank you for pointing that out. We could just do a console.log.error, console error. But yeah, try catch, always good practice to have that for something that could fail. Again, there's no guarantee that this fetch is going to succeed. So you should always wrap your API calls in a try catch. But there's another issue here that's going to pop up shortly. So I guess keep that in the back of your mind while we attempt to get the section links working. So if you remember when I was clicking on my section links up here, right? When I click on these, nothing really happens. Like we console log the correct, section, but we're not actually taken to the section page. Notice my URL is not changing. I'm stuck on the world page no matter what I click on. If I were on the home page and I click on any of these, again, these links are not functional because there's no links there. So let's actually add that functionality now. So to do that, again, this is our app nav component. So we're going to go to our app nav. App nav, where are you? There you are in our components folder. Where'd you go? App nav. All right, so we have app nav. Let's look at what we have right now. So right now we have an on-click handler on line 19 that is simply console logging the nav item value. Now that's what I kind of expected because that's all I was seeing in on my website. But we don't want to just log out, console log what we clicked on. We actually want to navigate somewhere. So for that, let's actually implement some navigation. So I'm going to get rid of this function. And instead, I guess I still want an anonymous function. We're going to call a new function. Let's call it handle nav click. That's good enough. And then we're going to pass in nav item dot value. Question for someone out there, because I feel like I'm talking a lot. Let us ask, I don't know who I want to call on here. Let's call on Michael Robertson, if you don't mind. I saw you kind of tipping your hat down. Can you tell me what the difference is between in my on-click handler calling my function like this versus adding an anonymous function? Is one better than the other? Is one required over the other? What's the difference?
You got to do the anonymous, otherwise it'll trigger instantly, right?
Yep, absolutely. 100% correct. Yes. So there's two versions here. One version, we're calling our handle click function or handle nav click function, but this version will immediately invoke our function because it's just like we're calling a function. So when this line 19 executes for JavaScript, this function will be called immediately, which is not what we want. Instead, we want to pass a function reference to this onClick so that when the onClick event happens, the onClick will call our function for us, right? So that's why we're passing a function and not calling a function here. Yep, thank you, Michael, for clearing that up. All right,
Is there any scenario where it would make sense that you're using the onClick, which seems to me indicates that it would wait until you clicked something, or where you actually have it automatically upload? Like, is there a scenario where that makes sense?
I mean, I guess you could. Like, if I didn't want to pass index here, I want to call a function called get index. That could be a case where nav item.value. If I need the value immediately, then I might have a function called get index that gives me the correct key value. Again, that's a hypothetical. But yeah, usually you're not going to see that. Usually you're just going to have anonymous functions. Just keep it simplified. I've not really created, I've never really had functions called directly from like a prop. But I guess it's possible. Like, React doesn't stop you from doing it. So if you had a use case for it, you're definitely welcome to do it within React's world. Okay, so I created this call to a handle click nav click, but we need to actually implement that. So let's go ahead and do that. And I like creating comments, just a section on my code, totally optional. Handlers in there, we're going to do const handle nav click, anonymous function. And I need a set arrow here. Okay, so handle nav click is going to get nav item value. So let's put that in here. And then what do we want to do? We have the nav item value, so that is going to be called, let's call it, I don't know, item value. Based on that, we want to navigate somewhere. So we know that all of these are sections. So that's just the way we designed it. All these are going to take us to a section page, either the opinion page, world, national, or business, I guess, URL. So for that, we get the item value. We simply want to navigate, and this is where we're going to use another built-in router function. So I'm going to import use navigate. Again, if you're like, where are you pulling this up from? Again, it's just reading documentation, being familiar with the router. if you're unclear on it, like I would Google React Router, how do I navigate from one page to another? Like, that should lead you to the answer. In this case, I can just tell you it's going to be from React Router down. There's this use navigate function, pretty simple to use. All we need to do is, I'm going with comments, I should do them for all. We simply do a const use, let's call it navigates. And that's going to be the return value of use navigates. Once we have this object, we can call navigate, I think it's a function, and where we want to navigate to. So in this case, we want to navigate to /sections and then / the item value. So let's call it section name or section, just to make it a little more clear. All right, we're going to use string interpolation here. So I need backticks, not quotation marks, and my $sign. All right, so based on what section we click on, we'll pass it to our handle nav click. Based on that, we're going to call this navigate function. Again, that's a React Router function that's going to navigate to a path. Oops. Navigate to a path, and that path, hopefully we have a route for that. So that route should match this route right over there, right over here. So we're navigating to this route. So again, we go /sections and then pass it a section name.
Hey, Ankur, on this, so when you call use navigate, does that actually like bring you to a whole nother page, or does that just like render just a certain section of the page?
So did you say use navigate or this navigate call?
Navigate down there, both of them. Like when you use that function, are you just changing the URL in the page, or are you actually like going to a whole new page?
So use navigate returns what I'm assuming is a function. I would need to kind of read more about that. But the navigate function is effectively as if the user clicks on a link, but you're forcing the redirect versus the user generating. So if you're the developer, want to go to a particular route, you want to use a navigate function. If you want the user to click on something, that's when you use the link tag or a tag, which we'll see. Actually, we're not going to implement that here. No. But yeah, so navigate's going to take us here, and then that should take us to a section page. Now, with that in place, let's go back to our, of course, this error. So looks like we can't do the navigate here. So I ran into this before, and now I know how to fix it. So we're trying to use the navigate functionality outside of a router, because appNav, where is that? App.js. So appNav is not inside of a router here. So I think this is a mistake, or maybe from before. What we want to do here is nest appNav within our router, because this router is giving us some functionality. One functionality is that navigatability. So in this case, appNav should be nested within browser router. Again, I'm not sure if New Site 3 had that or not, but we do want the appNav to be nested within browser router. Doing that, again, make sure you switch those. So you nest this underneath. You should get access to that navigates function. There we go. So we got no errors, or at least no errors right now. It's like we have, oh, that's probably from before. All right, let me refresh this, make sure we're good. All right, no errors, that's good. We got our articles. All right, so now if we click on one of these, we should be taken to the appropriate URL and see the section for that. So let's click on world, since we clicked on that before. All right, notice like the URL changed to sections.world. Let's make sure we have only world articles here. So yep, we have that Nemo article here. We also have that Delora, is that the one we checked before? Let's check another one here. So let's go to the last one. So I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce this, but I'm going to copy part of it, I guess. Go to my reference. Server should be giving me that. And let's paste that in here. Okay, notice we find the article. Section is indeed world. So I'm pretty confident that we've been filtered to only new world articles. All right, so this is working. Hooray, hooray. Are we ready to celebrate?
No, I think there's an issue.
What's the issue, Michael?
When you click on national, it's not going to update. And I think that's because our use effect is only working when we initially mount. I'm thinking, right? And so we need to add a state to the use effect so that when we change that section via the thing you just showed us with that nav, then it re-renders.
Absolutely. Yep. Michael hit it on the head. So at first glance, when we go from our home page, so I'm at my home page, when we click on any one of these, it's going to work correctly. So I click on business. These are going to be all the business articles. We can verify that, but just take my word for it, that these are going to be the business articles. So it worked correctly the first time. However, if I go from one section page location to another, so I'm going to navigate from section business to sections opinion, my URL changed, but my component is not changing. Remember what we said earlier in our lecture, when React is not going to refresh or like reload your component every time if you're using the same component. So in this case, we're still using a section component, but we do want to show different data. So as Michael alluded to, and not even alluded to, he said the correct thing here. We have a use effect right here. So this is our beautiful use effects that we implemented. But this empty array means the first time the section page component is rendered, that is the only time we're going to make this call to fetch articles by section. However, in our use case now, we're going from one section page to another. This component is not being reloaded or remounted. It's alive, it's breathing, it's there, but this use effect is not being called. So to alleviate that, for our cases here, we want to make this API call anytime our section URL has changed. Now, how can we figure out when our section name has changed? Well, we are able to locate our section name here. So we should be able to put in section, caps lock, section name here. Now this is a dependency. So anytime our section name changes from our props or from our params, I guess, we should trigger an update here. Now let's verify that. Again, I don't think that the construction should affect that, but yeah, I mean, the value is still going to change no matter how we access it. So now, anytime the section name changes from our params, again, those params are from our URL, it should trigger this piece of code again. All right, so given that, let's test this out. So I'm going to go back to my homepage. I'm going to click on, let's click on opinion first. So it looks like there's only 5 opinion articles. Okay, that's fine. So that worked correctly. Now let's go to world. So click on world. Notice that our articles refreshed. These should be our world articles. Yep, we have our Nemo article there. That was one of the ones we verified. So that works. So we click to national. Yep, we get some new articles. Notice that it is working now. So again, only change we had to make was we need to tell our use effect that, hey, we want you to make the API call initially and on any updates, but not just any old update, specifically only when the section name changes, right? We don't want to update when articles changes because this would potentially lead us to an infinite loop, because articles is a state value that can trigger a re-render of this component. But for that re-render, we don't want to re-get our data because our data is the one actually setting articles. So in this case right here, we'd be getting data, setting the articles, which would trigger another use effect because this use effect is saying, hey, whenever articles changes, let me go run this logic again. So again, you don't always want to put in like every potential change use case or re-render use case, specifically what should trigger this piece of logic. In this case, whenever the section name changes, well, that makes sense. We're using section name here, so we need to use that to get our new articles. All right, I feel like I've been talking a lot. Let me pause for questions or comments or concerns or anything. What questions do you guys have about what we did with the section page here?
Can you scroll down so I can see the return section? For whatever reason, mine is not. Yeah, it looks like it's the same. Mine's not displaying the articles under the section category.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll definitely need to maybe debug that. Yeah, so I copied all of this from the homepage. So none of this changed. The key thing that changed was our API call, also using params, and I guess now we implemented a dependency item in our dependency array. I'm not sure what else might have changed, but yeah.
I'm getting a weird error that says section page not defined for some reason.
That likely is because of the import, or you didn't export from your section page. I don't know, I'm kind of guessing here. make sure you have an export in your section page and then proper imports on your app.js. Again, I'm not quite
Okay,
sure.
that explains it, I think. I
Okay.
think that should resolve it now.
Hopefully that fixes it. Yeah, we could definitely take a look if it still persists. But yeah, if you guys have issues, we'll definitely try to fix them one-on-one here. Okay, so
Can I ask you to go back to section page real quick to the
Oh, yeah.
first
Absolutely.
couple lines?
Sure. So yep,
Could you
we
have-
need to import use state, use effects, use a param system we're using, import our API, internal API, and also the article list component since we're using it. Is there?
Ankur,
Yep, go for it, Tanya.
question. So use effect changes when the state changes or the params change?
It depends. Use effect will fire or trigger or execute, whatever word you want to use there. So this piece of logic will only execute, or I guess this piece of logic, based on what you tell it to react to. So in this case, we're saying react to this item. But yes, you can react to prop changes. So if I had like a props dot some value, if I had a props being passed in and I relied on that some value to tell me what to fetch, then yeah, you could have props in here, you could have a state value. So it's all depending on how you want the flow to work. So like what should trigger something else? So if a state changes, do we need to reload data? Do we need to load a new image? Like who knows? But yeah, the dependency should be a prop value or a state value.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Good questions. Keep them coming.
So if what would the behavior be like if we took out the list altogether? So because it's not something that's being rendered, it doesn't do the refresh whenever the state changes. Is that correct? If it was somehow being rendered, it would know to look for it and then refresh whenever, because I'm just trying to understand that case where we don't have that empty list down there.
Yep, good question. So keep in mind, so our initial state was empty array. If you do not pass the second parameter, so here we're not passing it, this actually will change your behavior and could lead us to an infinite loop. Do I still have my slides up? Did I kill my slides? All right, I don't have my slides up, but if you recall from the slides, which I'm sure were hard to follow, not having this will effectively implement, I'm just gonna add a comment here, no dependency array. That means components did mount plus component did update for any state or prop change. So now that we don't have that dependency array, anything that will trigger a re-render will cause this use effect to be called. Now this is likely going to be a problem because notice we have a state value called articles. So if this state value ever changes, this use effect is going to go into effect. Now, what's one way that articles will change? Well, as it so happens, inside of our use effect, we actually update set articles. So now when we set articles, that's going to say, hey, well, our state value changed. So let me rerun this use effect because that's what you told me to do because you didn't limit me to certain events. So if we do it this way, let's actually see if this causes an infinite loop or if some of that gets.
I think wouldn't it only do it once, and then when the set articles didn't actually change the value of the article, so assuming the data that it's retrieving doesn't change the second time around, its set article won't actually do anything the second time around, so it won't trigger the second time.
That's a tough question to answer, or not tough question. Let me put in a console log before I answer your question if you're fine with that. So console log, and this will say donuts. All right, I'm going to put that, let's put that right here. Let me verify what's going on before we attempt to expand. So I'm going to open up my console property inspector, maybe. Let's give it a moment. All right, notice what's going on here. I'm getting donuts and opinion print out endlessly. I'm stuck in an infinite loop. I mean, I still have functionality here. I still do stuff, but my logic is running that API call over and over again. This is bad, especially when you're using a third-party API. They will cut you off. They're not going to let you make infinite calls. They usually have like a limit, like a per minute limit or per second request limit. So again, what's going on here is data. We're setting articles, that data. So the problem here, let me kind of get to why this is happening. And what you said is mostly correct here. So how do I get out of here? All right, time to kill a server. What you said is mostly correct. So hypothetically, if this were like an integer value, let's say we had, if you guys can play along here, like a const int value. If this were a primitive value, I don't think I need to type this out, but sorry. Let's just pretend articles was an integer value, right? If we're a primitive type, React would be able to differentiate between a change. So let's say we got a value of 7 here. So let's say we got 7 here. React is going to say, all right, you got a value of 7 here. Let me run this use effect again. If we get 7 again, well, the dependency is going to know that the previous state was 7, the new state is 7. I don't need to do this again. So this will catch us if we had primitive types. The problem here is that this is not a primitive type. It's an array. React does not know how to compare equality for arrays. If you guys can remember data structures, you can't do a simple like equals to compare them. You actually need to look at each element, and if those elements are non-primitive types, you need to go deeper into them. Again, we need to do a deep copy. React does not do that by default. There is a way around it. So like even if I had articles here, it's gonna be the same issue because it does not know how to compare them. I could get around this if you guys want to know the secret here. The secret would be to use Json.Stringify. This will convert your data structure into a string so that the string values can be compared because strings are primitive types. So it's going to take your array, convert it to a string, and then next time around, it's going to compare the new value to the old value as a string. So in this case, where we get the same articles back, the string equivalent of those are going to be true, as in they're going to be equal, and that should protect us here. So again, that's kind of like I don't know if that's a cheating way, but that's one way to kind of handle non-primitive types. Just use Json Stringify that converts to a string format that can be compared by React. So if I do it this way, let's see if we get that infinite loop or if we protect ourselves. So do npm start. Again, this should infinite loop, except for the Stringify will protect us because it's going to detect that nothing's actually changing and that we shouldn't keep doing this. So let's verify that once this comes up. Okay, I think we're up. Let's go to our home page. Home. All right, that's still working. Let's go to an opinion piece. All right, that's still working. Let's take a look at our console, make sure we're not getting infinite. So notice we got opinion donuts. We're stuck. We're good. If I click on national. All right, not sure why that's not working anymore. Oh, because we took away, section name. Section name should still be our dependency. So, all right, so there we go. Refresh from scratch. All right, go to opinion. We get opinion donuts twice. We could probably detail that later. If we go to national, we get national and donuts twice. So it's making this call twice, but not infinite amount of times. So I assume the twice is because section name changes once and then the articles changes once, would be my guess. But again, this protects us. But normally speaking, you don't want to have a dependency based on something you're changing within the use. That's a general case. So again, you can get around it, but you should not have a dependency doing that. Does that all make sense, or did I lose anyone along the way?
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate it because I didn't understand exactly what was going to happen without the empty array down there.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate you asking. Again, great questions to ask. So again, almost always you're going to want to use a dependency list, even if it's empty. Again, empty means something totally different than not passing it at all. I mean, that's kind of counterintuitive. I assume empty is the default, but that is not the case. So we want section name and only section name. So now if we update our comment, this means react to any changes to section name, which comes. All right, cool. So I think that handles our section page. We do have one more item on the docket, and that is implementing the search feature. I think we're due for a break. So it's actually, we're gonna take a lengthy break here because I think I got a meeting to run into here. Let me stop recording.